already October. September has been so busy. If you've been watching my vlogs, you know I moved countries, so it's been a little bit hectic. It's not a great reading month, which is all the more reason for me to make this video, because I just wanted to show you that my reading months aren't really stable throughout the year, and I have my own good months and bad months. I have a lot to say, so let's just dive straight in. Trick Mirror was a fascinating collection of essays, and I would highly recommend this collection to anyone interested in the topics of gender, race, the internet, and just generally living in the age that we're living right now. There were so many references to books and movies, and it's truly one of these books that is an invaluable experience, because not only do you get to finish an amazing book, but you get to think about it for many more years to come, because there's no way that you can possibly explore all the references in a single year. Tolentino had a lot of insights, especially in regards to the internet, that really struck out to me, and I just wanted to share some of them because it's hard to talk about the essay collection without really giving away the central points, which is what I wanted to do with this video, to have sort of a summary and to hopefully recommend some books for you or to urge you to get back into the reading mood. One of the things Tolentino comments on is that we are quite similar to rats in that attention-seeking experiment, where the rat pulls at the lever because it believes that there will be a reward once it has pulled the lever, that its actions will have consequences. And then eventually what they started doing was that they started giving out the rewards irregularly. So when the rat would pull the lever, it wouldn't know if the reward would come out or not, and it would just keep doing that. And it's so similar to the way that we continuously scroll on Instagram or on YouTube to get that one fun short video that we think resonates with us. So rather than watching a long form video that you can truly dedicate your attention to and learn from, instead it turns into something of just mindlessly scrolling from pleasure and to get an instant reward, and something that we keep on doing. This is why it's so hard to get out of that time-consuming loop. We have that constant fear of FOMO, like fear of missing out, and that constant fear that we're behind everyone else in life and that we must do something about it, but then you're stuck in the loop of scrolling through social media and you can't do anything about it. I know the point about attention is probably not the first time you've heard it, but I do love the way that Tolentino puts it into words. I think one of her talents as a writer is to put those arguments that we constantly think about in a way that makes sense, in a way that's backed with evidence. And she also talks about the way that we make the internet about ourselves. The internet brings the I into everything. The internet can make it seem that supporting someone means literally sharing in their experience, that solidarity is a matter of identity rather than politics or morality, and that it is best established at a point of maximum mutual vulnerability. Tolentino argues that we are ultimately encouraged to support movements through relating them to ourselves. So, oh, I'm against racism against black people because I'm an ethnic minority myself, rather than thinking, oh, I'm against racism because it's another human being that we're discriminating against. This framework of putting yourself when thinking of supporting others is not ideal. This is why we're raising a generation of egotistical and narcissistic kids. This is why we have so much problem with specifically performative activism, because people are posting for the sake of getting the influence and getting the likes of people who think that they actually care about the issue. And another quote, what we have in common is obviously essential, but it's the differences between women's stories, the factors that allow some to survive and force others under, that illuminate the vectors that lead to a better world. And because there is no room or requirement in a tweet to add a disclaimer about individual experience, and because hashtags subtly equate disconnected statements in a way that can be controlled by those speaking, it has been even easier for Me Too critics to claim that women must themselves think that going on a bad date is the same as being violently raped. The issue is not with Me Too as a movement, which at its core aims to promote awareness about such issues. The issue is that the internet shows viewers this content to get their attention, and solidarity gets tangled up with visibility. And then that's when we have the distortive stuff and the performative activism and the blurring of lines, where it seems that anyone who's in support of social justice is actually one of those people who go way overboard and make it really awkward when we're talking about rights of anyone. Honestly, this is a great collection. The only reason I gave it 3.5 stars was because, and this is a very subjective opinion, I absolutely admit that, I think that the book could have been organized better, because you have this deep and emotional reckoning that I think everyone in our generation should read about the internet and about how it promotes this self-centric behavior, and then you have a piece about reality TV. because the author used to star in a reality TV show when she was a teenager. And the reality TV essay was actually one of my favorites, like more memorable ones, because it was quite entertaining, but it just didn't fit in with the themes. So it just felt like the essay collection never really got into its full pace because it kept being so disjointed. If the order was a bit different, then I think I would have given this 4 or more stars without question, but I would still absolutely recommend this to any lovers of nonfiction. The Last White Man is a piece of speculative fiction that revolves around the popular outright conspiracy that white people are being replaced. Here, the book takes it literally, because the main character wakes up to find himself shades darker. He was a white man before, and now he's black. And other people slowly start to experience that, but of course it's a very slow process. So at first he's the outsider, because who is the strange man? And then it's somebody else, and then somebody else, and then the whole world evolves into a panic. This book goes beyond simply a racial metaphor and beyond like just speculation on the reactions of people around it. I think that at its core it's just a very well written book, even with the at times clumsy writing, which I will talk about later, because the love story, which was a central part of the plot, the way that it connected with the plot, it was very clearly not there just for the sake of having it. It showed the difference between how the protagonist reacted to turning black and then how his partner reacted to turning black, already having empathized with him, and how their relationship blossomed from something that was purely physical and they didn't really have feelings for each other before, to a sense of actual mutual understanding and comprehension, to a sense of actual love. The way the characters had such polished and distinct voices actually astounded me. No, what astounded me even more was the amount of things Hamid managed to fit into such a short novel. It had such moments of strong emotional intensity in the book, such moments of identity reckoning or racial reckoning. And of course it's such a central discussion of like what makes us who we are. Is it our appearance? Is it our perceived experience associated with how we look when it comes to that? Because obviously people started treating him differently because he was no longer quite the same person as he was before, even though on the inside he was. So it's definitely a book that sparks discussion. The echo to Metamorphosis as well, I couldn't resist speaking about it. It's so simple yet so nuanced, because the first line is about how the main character reacts to find himself turned into a black man, and it's a very subtle allusion to metamorphosis when the main character wakes up to find himself turned into a cockroach. And I think it was a very apt comparison for the themes explored here, which was of course racial discrimination. So how the family treated the cockroach as no longer a member of their family, as something disgusting, as a wild creature, and how people's respect shifted to, I don't know, fear, anxiety at seeing this new man. Of course we had speculative fiction about race before, but this is my first time seeing something like this. And there were so many comments that were like, oh, it's a really racist book, the author wants to get rid of white people. And I think that's stretching it a little bit. I genuinely don't think that was the intention. I think the intention was to highlight the difference in how people are treated specifically in America, I would say, because it varies from country to country. Of course, in a predominantly black community, nobody's gonna treat you differently because you're black. The value of the message was obviously very important, but the way that the author put it forward, I think could have been improved just a little. So it was very much an amazing confrontation with us, because we were forced to question our own assumptions. We were thinking, oh my god, what if that was me? And then you start to think, why do I have a problem with it? And then you start to realize I have a problem with it because I recognize my privilege. And then you start to confront your own racist assumptions, because the tone of the book sort of prompts you to think about it. And what I thought was good was the way it prompts you, but what was not so great was that it throws the first punch and then you kind of throw the punch back, so you respond. And then it doesn't like defend itself, if I'm using the fight metaphor. Like, it doesn't continue the fight, it doesn't do anything. It just kind of leaves you with this really big, massive gap that you're expected to fill in with your own musings and reflections. And that was very helpful. But I also think it did end up giving the book a somewhat empty feeling, a somewhat perhaps slightly superficial ending. I also think that sometimes the writing worked and sometimes it didn't, because we would have these beautiful lyrical passages of setting that were so great, and then a really emotional moment that was described in a super dry way. So we didn't have this sense of stability, and I also think that it was a little bit manipulative in the things that it was trying to show. So for example, we didn't have the narratives of black people who were actually black before this like mysterious transformation. We didn't have the thoughts of somebody who was racist before. No, we just sort of had the implication that this is it, this is the true reality, there's nothing good about being a black person, start realizing we live in a racist society. I felt that if we had a more complex evaluation, it would have done the book even better, because not doing that and not sort of showing all the sides and claiming to be a transformative novel and doing it in such a short way did leave me a bit with the feeling that we didn't go into much more depth, and also it gives room for people who don't want to read about the subject to say, oh, the author is brainwashing you, oh, this is reverse racism. So I think this could have done better, simply to just target more people because it's an important message. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I know this is a little bit of a controversial opinion. I do hope you understand what I'm saying, so I'm not saying that the book is bad because it didn't include other people's narratives. No, I'm just saying that I think a more complex take would have enhanced it even more. But overall, it was very interesting, and you absolutely must pick it for your book club. I feel really bad giving this next book 2.75 stars because it's a self-help book, but it's not self-help in the Andrew Tate style, you're worthless if you don't have a Bugatti, be a Sigma male, toxic style, like motivation. So this is a South Korean part memoir, part, I don't know, part self-help, I guess if you can call it that. And I like that it's very open in saying that this is the author's personal experience, that this is just, she recorded this for people who are having trouble speaking out about their mental health issues, because in Korea that's a massive problem. Therapy is an intensely personal journey. The therapist can say anything to you and you won't get it, and then the next therapist can say the exact same thing to you and you can process it. And the way that you process it will also be different. If I have the same problem as my friend, one therapist's words are not going to affect me as much as my friend, and vice versa. Because you're not directly in that situation, you're left feeling a little bit like an outsider, and that this is sort of like, it doesn't apply to me. And while it's great to have read about the author's experiences, it doesn't really feel like we know her either, because structurally I had issues with this. It's structured as part of a transcript between her and her therapist over a couple weeks, and then there's like sort of one-page inserts about her reflections, and the whole thing just started to feel a little redundant, especially when you don't feel like the tips are helping. And that was very disappointing, because when the author started talking about her problems at first, I was like, oh my god, did I find a self-help book that will actually help? But no, because the themes she covered are pretty universal, like, oh, feeling irrationally angry at somebody and knowing that you shouldn't be. However, that being said, if you want to talk about this and you want something that's very palatable, oh, I'm so sad and I cry all the time and I feel fatigue all the time, and it doesn't go into like the deeper, more serious, disturbing issues that can surface when one is feeling this way, then I think that this book is great for you. And if it helps, I have no problem with you giving it 5 stars. Actually, with none of these books, your opinion, like, I don't mind what you think, it's an opinion. I just felt that like it was a little bit of a waste of my time, and I don't think this is the author's fault specifically, and the words of her therapist, who she has seen in real life, won't affect us so deeply when we're just reading through a screen some very vague comments from her therapist, might I add. Like, these feel like things that a friend would say, and while it's great that she has such a close relationship with her therapist, I feel like sometimes it was crossing boundaries just a little bit. Like, as friends, sometimes we don't probe into each other's life. It's a separate discussion on whether we should continue probing when a person doesn't want to answer, but like sometimes we'll be like, oh, you're sad? I'm sorry. Like, here, have a hug, here, have some tea, tell me about your issues, and then they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, and you're like, okay, but like, if anything, I'm always here. We don't probe, we just offer our support. But the therapist is kind of there to ease it out of the person, to sort through these issues. And the way that the therapist sometimes responded, like, oh, you drink because you don't want to be left out. Okay, great. And is that it? Is that what you're gonna say? Like, oh, you're prescribing some pills and that's it? So yeah, I did not love this book so much. And honestly, with this level of hope, I'd rather just go back home and eat my mom's tteokbokki than read this. I loved Lisa Tadeo's Animal. I couldn't get enough of her writing. She is the type of author that can show you so much about a character's personality with one sentence. And her characters are so complex and so often disturbing. They're filled with pure female rage. And I love the way they're written because she makes unlikable characters fascinating. Even if you're one of those people who can't stomach anyone deviating from your so-called morality, I think you would still enjoy it because there's just something so vivid and so visceral about them that you can't tear your eyes away. And honestly, this book made me say, not this one, the Animal, it made me say, I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. Ghost Lover was no exception in terms of the Tadeo themes. She really took all of the toxic characteristics that women often have and just lumped them together into characters, and here we go! It's manic and it's thrilling, and I'll give you some examples of the short stories featured here. Ghost Lover is about this app that helps an army of pretty women text girls' crush if they're nervous and kind of take that anxiety and fear onto themselves. In another, there's a fundraiser and the main character knows that people are just tolerating her because of her wealth, and she kind of decides to do this very twisted thing in order to get their attention. And it's very much a discussion of the Me Too things that I actually mentioned in the Trick Mirror essay collection. In another story, there is a woman who's overjoyed. She's literally delirious that a married man who she has been sleeping with has left her his watch. And then we have a plot twist and we see why he did it, and we're left with the feeling like, oh god. And the themes that unite this are that all the women are obsessed with something, and they're also mostly pretty, rich, skinny, and obsessed with being more beautiful, with being richer, with being skinnier. They're obsessed with their appearance because Tadeo sort of takes those tropes and she elaborates them, and every story was very unique in its own way. However, I think that for Tadeo, the short story format just simply doesn't work as well as her long story format, because in Animal, the plot is that we have a main character who hates men because of trauma in her childhood and other trauma throughout her life, like with small assaults, when she felt assaulted, when she was actually assaulted. And so it gets to a very disturbing level, to a point where she's like, I know I need help, but I will continue this way because there's no one that can help me. And it's just a great dive into exploring psyche and just rage and the way that it can build up in people. But and we had that one character, so we can learn to empathize with her and be like, yeah, bestie, don't do that, but also like, I feel sorry for you and I know where you're coming from. These are the types of books that help us to develop empathy and to understand other people when you fundamentally disagree with what they're doing. But in the short stories, when you see just lines and lines of women who all want the same thing, no matter how unique the stories are, it all sorts of to just lump into one character. Like, you have these beautiful individual pieces of clay and then you kind of mush them into this grayish ball, and it just doesn't work great, because when we begin to emphasize with one character, suddenly the story ends because it's a short story, right? And we move on to the next character, but then we're still thinking of the other one, and even if we give time to process, they still kind of blur together because of their similar goals and aspirations. Plus, of course, there is the difficulty with rating short story collections that you will encounter throughout this entire video. I do apologize for the big literary critique today, because the issue with short story collections is that one is undoubtedly 5 stars and the other one is barely 1 star, so then you're left not knowing how to rate the collection. And I hate doing ratings, but I also realized that most people don't have the attention span. They just look at the rating and they base it off of there. So I ended up just giving this one 3 stars. And honestly, if you're looking for a disturbing read that's more like social during October, then I would definitely pick Ghost Lover up. However, Animal all the way. Hands down one of my favorite books this year. So I would just skip the read and go to Animal instead. whimsical collection of 36 linked stories set in a Japanese neighborhood. These were so magical and so whimsical, and are you sensing a theme here with the short story collection? I have been on such a short story collection spree. I can't even understand what prompted me to go into this. I can't get enough of short stories. I just want to read more. I obsessively, like Tadeo's characters, consume a short story in the morning. I have a break, then my first break in between classes I read another short story, and then I have lunch, and then I reflect, and then I read another short story, and then I come home, and then I do my homework, and then I reflect, and then I read another short story. And I remember them very distinctly. I give myself enough time to process them, but I just spend a lot of time reading them. People from my neighborhood was very different from all the other short story collections, and not just because it was actually short. Short stories are, in my opinion, are around 10 to 20 pages. If it's more, it's reading a little bit like a lengthy chapter. This book took that to another level. Every story was 1 page long. Some of them was like a paragraph, and they were so whimsical too. Like, there was a story about a man who just told us about chicken hell. Then there was a story about 2 shadows, and then whenever the second shadow attaches to someone, they die, and then the first shadow tries to save them. And then there's the story about this boy who nobody wants, and then they give him away in the lottery, and I thought that was kind of sad. Like, no matter how funny the author made it out to be, that was a little bit sad. And then there was just a fascinating passage. This alone made me think so much about it. About the spirit who turns into a bunch of plates and then into a baby. And it's like how if you sort of leave the plates, just kind of, they turn into a plate in the middle of nowhere, and then a bunch of other plates, you have to pick them up and pile them on top of each other, and then it turns into a baby. So it's very unique. And at first I hated how fragmented it was. I honestly thought I'd DNF it like the very first page, because reading about chicken hell and then that in 1 page, it was just a bit like, this sounded like somebody was rambling or pulling out notes from the garbage. But then I started to see that it was very much like a puzzle, and then when you got towards the end, you started to really know all the characters and kind of feel like you were living in that neighborhood too. I think this is just very much a comfort story. This collection explores very much Kawakami themes, if that gives you anything. Kawakami talks a lot about how setting and time shapes characters. For example, in Strange Weather in Tokyo, the 2 main characters are united and they spark an intergenerational romance over a shared bar and over a shared memory and over this mood, the season change that they're in. Here is the neighborhood that unites this collection. It's literally titled People from My Neighborhood. And what I liked the most was actually that it had the suggestion that there's more magic that lurks below the surface. So like when you talk about lotteries, of course we think about everyday lotteries, but here you have a boy being given away lotteries. Instead of storm warnings, we have zero gravity warnings. And it also poked subtle fun at politics, like there's a politician that nobody has ever seen. To be honest, I could have used a little bit more, and then by the end, the collection did start to get a little bit draggy because it felt like we already knew the characters and then we still had the same rhythm going. So it's like, do I really need to know about that one guy's dog one more time? But overall, it's a very cozy collection. If you want to get into it, and if you're willing to give it enough of a chance to struggle through the beginning and then struggle through the end to just have that golden middle bit. It definitely won't be a favorite, I can promise you that. Even if you have comfort novels, this won't be a favorite comfort novel, but it won't be a disappointment either. It's very much in the middle. Menjin's writing was fantastic. It was, oh my god, chef's kiss. It was so compelling, and it perfectly fit in with the atmosphere and the general mood of the story, because self-portrait with ghosts, and we have these associations with ghosts as these slippery, something unreal, this being that exists between reality and irreality, and irreality with a theme that was constantly explored throughout the novel, how they intersect, how the 2 of them have these shared boundaries and what can emerge from those boundaries. The writing had this the same elusive beauty to it. I feel like I was reading these stories even if I didn't understand them or enjoy them, just because they were interesting. They truly lured you in. A lot of the times with short stories, if you don't really care about a short story from the beginning, you're sort of plowing on to the end just for the sake of plowing on. Here, even if I didn't like the plot or didn't like the characters, I was really enjoying myself because the writing was great. This is very much the type of story that you have to read multiple times to get the meaning, and even if I think I know the meaning, I know that in a couple of years I will go back and I will see something that is completely different. And I can't wait for that change, for enough time to pass for me to see this again with fresh eyes, because I think there's a lot that you can get out of this collection, not only for the writing. The writing is honestly like, why pay money for a workshop when you have this book? But also because I think the concepts are really interesting. I would particularly like to highlight suffering. This is probably an unpopular pick because most people liked The Odd Women at the end because it was a more lengthy collection and explored curious things. But Suffering really stood out for me because of the topics that it had. Once again, topics for me are very important in short stories, because if it's a short story, you have a very limited amount of time to say something. So I think that if you choose a topic, you should stick to it, and you shouldn't aim for a superficial exploration of it. You should actually take the time and do a deep dive. Essentially, we have this plot of a single mother who decides to go on a dating app with this older guy. She literally tells him from the onset, oh, I can give you children if you provide with me, and then everything is great. Like, he's not that ugly. She's hoping he will die soon, most probably, but we don't talk about that. They go to a restaurant, he feeds her lots of nice food, and then her toxic sister arrives. Well, the thing is, she portrays her to be toxic, but rather her sister is just successful. She lives in America, she brings her gifts, and then the main character starts to experience symptoms of poisoning, and she thinks it's her sister, and then their familial bonds obviously start to loosen up a bit. They start to lose touch and hate each other even more. But then even stranger things start happening, and at some point her son starts being threatened. And it's just an exploration of paranoia and like actually taking the time to think logically and rationally when it's so hard. And again, there's that blend of the afterlife and the present life, and seeing how all of this is connected. Is it a ghost? Is it not a ghost? Nobody knows. I know, I'm so sorry. I have been promising to talk and read and finish what is literature for genuinely months. It's full disclaimer, it's probably going to be a whole entire year until you see the finished product, and that's because this is Sartre. Okay, so Sartre in his essay, What is Literature, talks about some of the greatest, most major literary debates, like what distinguishes poetry from prose, and like what makes it a very good book, what is good writing, for whom do we write, how should we write, how should the writer put out their message. Truly a seminal discussion and a very central work of literary theory. And usually I make summary videos, and I wanted to do that, but I also wanted to respond to some of his points and kind of share my own opinions. And actually, please do let me know what you think about this in the comments, but I wanted to start a playlist where I talk about works of literary critique and kind of learn it as I go along, and you can learn with me, and it can be a shared journey, and we can share each other's thoughts and experiences. Please be patient, and I am sensing that it will be a massive video essay. In this video, I would like to talk a little bit about why I think that you should read this book. So reason one is actually the intellectual practice, because Sartre's writing is so dense. He can make 5 points, 5 very unique points that you have never heard before, that you have to think and process in one sentence, and the sentence is a page, and then the next sentence builds off that sentence, so you can't come back to that sentence later. You need to understand it. It's a very hard book. When I initially started reading the first page, I was like, oh, this is so interesting, this is so nice. The second page, I was like, oh, cool, so we're getting past the introductory stuff. 5 pages in, I was like, oh god, what did I sign up for? So one of my top tips, if you decide to start this book now, please actually do, I think it's very worth it, is actually to keep notes. And I say this tip for every book, but if you're lazy and you don't do it, please do it just for this one. I will also ultimately need to come back to the book, read through my notes, and then track down the references so I can make that promised video for you. Reason number 2, the less study hard reason, it's that I think that this is very helpful and would be fascinating to anyone interested in reading and writing, and since you're watching this video, I assume that's you. Reason number 3, I think it's a very novel book, and nobody put it together like Sartre did before this, it still remains one of the key works, as I mentioned before. And I think it's worth it just for the cultural knowledge, just for the appreciation, just for seeing intellectually active and incredible mind of Sartre. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you read. You can rant to me if you have nobody to rant about. Even if you do have somebody to rant about, talk to me. Thank you.